Hey, what's up, you guys? My name is Grace Lauren Taylor, and you are listening to episode 55 of the Trauma Dump podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Here at the Trauma Dump podcast, we seek to answer the question, what is mental health? How do I take care of my own, and how do I support others? This week, we will be discussing the topic of defying odds when it comes to traumatic brain injury with our very special guest of the week, Nick Prefontaine. Please go check out Nick Prefontaine on his website. The links will be in the description. Hey, if you'd like to share on the show, please message us in our Discord in the podcast participants channel along with your unique experiences, and we will match you to the right episode. And just a quick disclaimer before we start, I am not a licensed health professional, okay? This podcast only seeks to create community and further understanding of these topics that are so often overlooked and extremely misunderstood. If you or a loved one are in need of medical professional help, we have resources in our description. The topics discussed here are for a mature audience, so viewer discretion is always advised. And if you're liking what we're doing here on the Trauma Dump podcast, please hit that like button, please subscribe, click that subscribe button, and please turn on the bell so you can get notifications every time we post. And just a reminder, we post new episodes of the Trauma Dump podcast every Sunday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. So if you want to tune in when we're live, when we're airing, please make sure to do so. And if you like this podcast and you think somebody else might also like this podcast, please share it with your friends. It helps the podcast reach more people, helping others become trauma-informed and building a community around being conscious of how we perceive trauma and how we perceive the rest of the world. So, if you like it, send it to your friends. And if you're listening to us over on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rate the show. That also really helps us out a lot. All right, let's get into this episode. Hello, Nick. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Hey, Grace, I'm doing even better now that I'm here with you. I had a chance to catch up with you a little bit before we jumped right into this and started the recording. I'm looking forward to this.
I'm looking forward to it too. So, we're talking about defying the odds when it comes to a traumatic brain injury. Would you tell us your story about how you got your traumatic brain injury?
Sure. Goes back way back to 8th grade, and my friends and I all got released a little bit early for ski club, and that's something when you're in 8th grade, that's a big deal. That's pretty exciting. So, we had brought our gear onto the bus to get ready, so we wouldn't miss. And we were the minority. There were only a few of us that brought our gear onto the bus to get ready. The rest of the people were goofing around and were like, "Oh, all right, when we get there, we can get ready." So we didn't want to waste any time. We got to the mountain and we headed right for the chairlift. And on the ride up, Grace, we noticed that it was very icy because it had been raining. So people were wiping out everywhere. And it wasn't something that fazed us, needless to say. So because it wasn't our first time on skis and snowboards, my friends and I. So um, the chairlift actually went right over the terrain park where all of the jumps were. And I knew as soon as I saw it that I had to go off the biggest jump in the terrain park. I was like, oh yeah, that's got my name all over it. I got to the top, buckled into my snowboard, took a breath of that crisp winter air, and confidently charged towards that jump with all my speed. And going up to the jump, I caught the edge of my snowboard and was forced to go off the jump off balance.
Mm.
Um, and I've come to learn, I didn't know this at the time, or even years later, I didn't even know this. I've come to learn, however, through my inner work and working with energy healers and what I term as my energy coach, that at the moment of impact, I had a decision to make and I got really still. I left my body and had two choices. Option one, it's going to be really hard, and once you get through it, you'll help trauma survivors thrive with the rest of their lives. Or you can move on to the other side. And I chose the really hard path. Obviously, I'm talking to you today, so there were several things about that day that I still don't really recall. It's just been what I pieced together from eyewitness accounts, doctors, everything like that, what happened. So um, I landed on my head, wasn't wearing a helmet. Even though I wasn't wearing a helmet, what I was wearing was a pair of goggles. And my goggles, not only, I had goggles with a lot of padding on them. So that they were they were pretty substantial. A lot of foam padding on them. And they not only braced my impact initially, as I continued to roll down the mountain and continued to hit my head, they mysteriously or not so mysteriously, depends what you believe. I believe everything happens for a reason. Respect everyone out there, your belief, but that's what I believe. So with each impact, they moved to cushion the fall between my head and the mountain. So as I continue to roll, they continue to move and cushion my blow. So that's the first thing that happened that really contributed as to why I'm standing here and telling you this story today. The second of which was they wanted to bring a helicopter to the mountain to rush me to the hospital. They couldn't because it was too windy. So they had to send in an ambulance. And out of all the paramedics in the area, there was only one who could intubate right on the spot. And because of the severity of my injuries, I needed that to be able to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
Lucky for me, like the second break was he was one of the paramedics that showed up to the mountain that day. And then when I made it to the third and most important thing, I think, Grace, was when I made it to the hospital, I was resting in the intensive care unit. Now, I was out. I was like out for the count, and the only people allowed in my room were my parents, like immediate family at the time, as you can imagine that. So I was out. The doctors weren't doing anything malicious. They were just doing their job. But they came into my room and started to share with my parents the prognosis, and it was they initially started sharing, and then it kept getting worse and worse and worse. And because they have to, for liability, they have to protect their protect cover their butts, if you will. So they started to share all that news in front of me, and my mom caught them and she said, no, no, not in front of him, because she understood that even though I was in a coma, I was still taking in information. So she made the doctors step outside my room, the hospital room, and that's where they shared with my parents that, look, he's been in a snowboarding accident. Based on the impact alone, he's probably going to be out for 7 to 10 days at a minimum, and he already has swelling in his brain. So they didn't want me to wake up after those 7 to 10 days and freak out and worry about, who are you? What are you guys doing here? How did I get here? And so therefore the swelling would have increased, would have went up, and I would have died. So they had to induce me into a coma, partially induce me into a coma so that my body could heal. All in all, in total, I was in the coma for 3 weeks, although I really don't, Grace, remember a month, because it was a partially induced coma. So as I was coming off those drugs, it's interesting. After 3 weeks, my uncle, Jay, who's no longer here, he said to my parents, you got to record this. You gotta film Nick. You gotta film the hospital room, and because he's gonna want to see this someday. And if it wasn't for that, my family wouldn't have videoed me. However, they did. They videoed me. So I've seen videos of myself with my eyes open in the hospital bed in the intensive care unit, like looking around, I have no conscious memory of that whatsoever. Um, and that's because I was coming off of all that drug and medication. I needed that to because of the severity of my injury. It wasn't like I could say, no, no, I just want to do all natural. Um, so yeah, exactly. I see you shaking your head. Exactly. So there were, all in all, I was in the coma for 3 weeks. I really don't remember a month, 4 weeks. And a month after my accident, I was transported to a rehab hospital um, in Boston. And that's where my first memories, conscious memories, really start to come back. And when I say when I was in the intensive care unit that I don't remember it, it's really funny. I don't want to skip this point. It's really funny because I went back there a couple years after my accident and spoke. It was one of the first places I spoke at. It was a groundbreaking ceremony for that hospital that was that was doing a new building. And as part of that, before I spoke, I went up to the intensive care unit, the SU where I was. I was walking around the unit and I was like, oh my God, this looks so familiar. Like the layout of the floor, the rooms, like everything looks so familiar, right down to the faces of the doctors and nurses. And I was like, oh my God, I could swear I know you guys. I know this building. I know, but I don't consciously know, like it's like vaguely I remember it, but I don't conscious memory of it because my eyes are open, but it's like the lights are on but no one was home. So after a month, I as I said, at the rehab hospital, that's where my first memories really start. And I had to learn everything again. So one of the other things the doctors told my parents is, look, we don't even know how long he's going to be in the coma, and when he comes out of it, there's a good chance he's probably not going to be able to walk, talk, or eat again. So I literally had to learn everything all over again. So when I say after a month I was transported to the rehab hospital, it was it was it was an uphill battle. It was a long road ahead. So I remember very early on in my recovery, and initially I was on the third floor, which was reserved for the most critical of cases. I remember overhearing my parents talking with the doctors, and this is before I could even speak, because basically everything was taken away from me. I was like a 14-year-old baby, if you can picture that. I had to learn everything again. I couldn't speak, and I overheard them talking to my doctors and my therapists saying, all right, so what do we have to do this week to make sure Nick makes a full recovery? And I heard in the back of my head, no, you're going to run out of the hospital. So then I was able to communicate that to them. And then that became our common goal, that we were meeting, that's where my company name comes from, common goal. So that was the goal, that we were all meeting together every week to determine, all right, what do we need to do each week to get to the common goal of running out of the hospital. Now, it was around this time that I started unknowingly to utilize a system to not only make a full recovery, but run out of the hospital. And that's what I teach, and I live to this day. I teach it in my keynotes. I do 45, 50, and 60-minute keynotes to like brain injury associations and other organizations that are working with individuals that are going through trauma, and also with the step video program, and all my one-on-one work with clients. That's exactly what I teach to this day. STEP is an acronym. It stands for support. You have to make sure you have the support of your family and friends right from the start, and this is going to have you falling back on relationships that you built prior to your setback. T is trust. So part of my support was my parents, and I had like they were advocating for me the whole way through. And then T is trust. Trust that once you take your first step, your next step is always going to be available to you. follow it. And this also is about trusting that voice that we all have. Um, Call it the unconscious, the subconscious, universe, God, whatever you want to call it. We all have that voice in the back of our head. And I think too often, so many of us will like shun that voice and say, oh no, that's not realistic, or I could never do that. I can never do anything like that. Um, but you should listen to that. You should definitely tune in and listen to your voice. I'll and a little bit later in my story, I'll bring up where that came up for the second time, that voice, and that really was the impetus to start Common Goal to begin with. Common Goal in the first place. So E is energy. Maintaining your energy allows your body's natural ability to be able to heal itself. Medication has the ability to get in the way of that, to interfere with that. So there were a lot of drugs that were pumped into me to help keep me alive, and I needed that. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't like I could go, no, I don't want to do drugs. I just want to do the natural option. So I needed that. After I was transported to the rehab hospital in Boston, that's where I began my journey of having to learn how to walk, talk, and eat again. My parents wanted to get me off of the medication as soon as possible. And it was right around this time that it was very early on in my recovery. So I would always have someone with me, an advocate. That was part of my support, and that's one of the things we teach to this day is a step system. Within that is an advocate that's within support. So I always had someone with me all the time. So it was my mom and her parents during the day, and then it was my dad, an uncle, our grandfather. Someone would always stay with me at night. And it was early on in my recovery that I was having my grandfather stay with me. This is still before I could talk. I wasn't cleared to walk on my own yet. I would have to have someone behind me or making sure I didn't fall. And I got up in the middle of the night, Grace. I tried to get the attention of my grandfather, um, who actually snores, and that's a whole nother story. But I tried to get his attention to get up and help me to the bathroom. He wouldn't wake up. So I, on my own, got out of my hospital bed and was able to make my way to the bathroom and get back. Nothing happened. However, the hospital the next day found out and they freaked out. So, like, we can't have this. We're going to give him this many cc's of that medication, this many cc's of this medication before sleep, and that should calm him down to sleep. And my mom's like, no, you're not. Just tell him not to do that. So they did. They told me not to do that, and there was never another incident again. However, the reason I want to bring that story up is because if I didn't have an advocate there to intervene on my behalf, they would have just drugged me to make their jobs easier. And that's one of the things I talk about in energy is as soon as you can come off the medication, the better. So P is persistence. Once you take your first step, keep getting up every day and taking your next step, no matter how small. And by continuing to do something every day, you are building an unstoppable momentum. So it was very early on in my recovery. I consciously remembered that I was going every day. I had double sessions of physical, occupational, and speech therapy. And even after that, I asked the therapist and the doctors, can you give me some extra exercises? Because I want to get to my goal faster of running out of the hospital. So they did. So then on the weekends when I was supposed to be resting, I did extra exercises. So I was doing something every day. I wasn't pulling 8-hour days or anything, but I was just doing something every day, whether it was 1 or 2 exercises at a minimum, even on a Saturday or a Sunday. And that helped me build that unstoppable momentum. And that continued to carry me through the hard times. Because everyone faces that. Everyone faces hard times. It's kind of a fantasy to think you're never going to encounter any resistance or anything like that. So if you fast forward a little bit, Grace, I did little less than 60 days later, I ran out of the hospital. I realized my goal, And it wasn't like my work was done after that. I had to continue to go to outpatient therapy for another 6 months, physical, occupational, and speech therapy, along with being tutored all summer long in order to continue on to high school with the rest of my classmates. And really looking back on it, it's a little surreal that only 18 months later, I got my start in real estate, which was door knocking, pre-foreclosure doors. So homeowners that have received the notice of default letter from the bank, meaning that they had missed a few payments up to 10 or 12, and the bank still hadn't foreclosed on the home. And I would get a list, go out to these doors and try to set up meetings for the following week for our investor, to meet with them about potentially to see if it'd be a fit, for us to buy their property and help them out of their unfortunate situation. So, I think that is a good place to take a break in, my story. If you have any questions.
I do. I do. I just want to say that I am in awe of you, and I am exceptionally glad to have you on because my dad died from a traumatic brain injury, and he lived as long as he could after the initial incident. He was hit by a car in our front yard.
Oh, wow.
It drove off the road and hit him. Um, and this happened a few days before my 20th birthday on June 19th, 2020. So it was in the midst of COVID. And
Mhm.
so no one was allowed to see him. And I really do believe because of that, he didn't get to survive because he didn't have his support system. My
Mhm.
dad was loved by everyone in my family. He was the youngest of four boys, loved beyond loved. He was about 45 when this happened.
Oh, wow.
And because of all of the COVID restrictions, only one person was allowed to see him, and that was my mother. And she's not a good person. So it was, I feel like that also added to it. Not saying my mom killed my dad, but she didn't really allow us kids to go. Once the restrictions got lifted and lifted, she was very selfish and wouldn't let us kids go. I went for a total of 5 times to see my dad.
Mhm.
And he fought so hard. And I'm so proud of him. He was so resilient. He had so much endurance. He fought so hard. He eventually passed away November 6th, 2021. So he lived almost a year and a half after the incident. And I just want to say that I'm so glad that you had your family, that you had your support system who loves you and who made sure that you are here today making a difference for everyone else because that's awesome. And it also gives me hope because when I was, going through all of this research on TBIs, especially when my dad just got his TBI, it was evident that people with traumatic brain injuries need love and community like so much. And that is essential for their survival. And the only thing that I could do for my dad was I've been making crystal beaded jewelry since I was a little kid. And that was like a hobby that my dad really let me continue. He like reinforced it. He would buy me beads and stuff like that. And so I made him one that said endurance. And so he wore that every day. And
That's
that was the
awesome.
only way that I could let him know that I was still there, even though I couldn't be there physically.
Mhm.
And I just, I'm really in awe of your endurance. I want to know once you were out of the hospital, how did your TBI affect your own mental health?
I don't I don't think, thank you for the question. I don't think it was never something I consciously thought of, to be candid with you. It was, and this may have been part of how I was raised. It was just, to me, and still looking back on it, I don't think it's that big a deal. Which is interesting because I'm reflected back from a lot of people that it is a big deal. I just think, oh, well, something that happened to me when I was 14. I recovered, I got up, I did the best I could, and I did what anyone else would do. And the older and older I get, the more people are saying to me, no, Nick, that's not normal. What you did and what you overcame is not normal. It was interesting because I had to, so I got out on April 19th, or like April 23rd or 24th, somewhere around there. And I remember going back to school. There was only, so what? There was only a month left of school, maybe a little more. So I wasn't able to go in because I wasn't able to keep up with my classmates where they were, because I missed all that time. However, what I did do was go in. Remember how I said I still had to go to outpatient therapy. So I would go in the mornings. I would work with my tutor from like 9:30 to like 12, or maybe 9 to 12. I'd work one-on-one in a room at the school with my tutor to help me get caught up. Then I would go to lunch with all my friends and my classmates. And after which was the best part of my day, by the way, because that was the best part of going to school, was seeing everyone that I miss, and I missed so much time. So then I would get picked up from my mom, and she would take me to outpatient therapy for the afternoon. And I didn't have to do double sessions, but I still had to do sessions of physical, occupational, and speech therapy. So that was kind of how it looked, and it was full days. I was actually, because of this, able to walk with my 8th grade class at graduation. However, it wasn't like the work was done for me. So they were like, "Woo, awesome. We're on to high school, great summer and everything." I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I still have to get tutored 5 days a week all summer long to continue on to high school with everyone." So it was definitely an interesting time. I remember the way my family kind of like framed it is they didn't want me to feel like I had any limitations. So that was the goal from the beginning, which is you're going to get back to what you were doing. So even though I had some limitations, like safety wise, like I couldn't go skateboarding, or I couldn't go skydiving or anything like that. For the most part, I was able to have have a quasi summer with my friends, and be able to hang out and be with them. It was interesting though, that, and I noticed this, and I don't know if you have noticed this. So there was, when I first got in my accident, there was a ton of support, ton of love and support from the whole town, and there was Pray for Pre t-shirts that they had made up and everything. And even when I came back, um, even when I came back to school, there was so much love and support, and everyone was always pulling for me. It was just interesting to me because after like the I guess fanfare wound down, I remember there being like a lull. And this isn't something I have shared before on a podcast. So definitely being rather open with you. I haven't shared this before. So there was definitely a lull where, I don't know, after like the fanfare and like the publicity and everyone, like after that wound down, it was really like kind of like, all right, now what do I do? And it was just keep going. that's part of step, which is persistence. So I just kept working. Just every day I kept going.
Yeah, I get that 100%. And I resonate so hard because when my dad's accident happened, people started a meal train for me and my brothers because my mom decided she'd be in the hospital at all times. And so it was almost like me and my two younger brothers became orphans overnight. And so it was kind of left to our community whether we ate or not. And so for the first, 2 months, because this happened in summer, people were giving us meals. They would stop by, give us like gift cards so that we could go out someplace. And, my birthday had happened a few days after the accident. So my aunt Mina made a big birthday party for me, and everyone was just trying to make everything seem normal. And I remember sitting with my brothers 2 months after the accident and trying to figure out what are we going to do? Because my brothers were both minors. I had just turned 20. Like, what are we going to do? And because my mom was still in the hospital with my dad, she also decided she wasn't going to be a mom. That's another level to it. She fully said to our faces, she didn't want anything to do with us, that our dad was her biggest priority. And she took all of us off of the health insurance, car insurance, phone plans, everything. So I had to become a mom to my siblings, which not great, but no one really knew this in our family. I kept trying to ask for support. They'd be like, "Oh, your mom's just busy." And I'd be like, "No, my mom has told me she doesn't want me anymore." And so I had to essentially move my brother with me to college all by myself and try to figure out that all by myself. And that sucked. And because we went to my mother's alma mater, there are people at Texas Tech University in Lubbock that had an idea of our situation, didn't know our situation, but had an idea. And so they were really nice, and they bought my brother some dorm supplies. And I have a service dog, so they gave me a bunch of like dog treats and stuff like that. And I remember being in college and being like, I need help. I need support. I have no money. My mom won't give me money. I've asked for money to do stuff. And then I've come to find out, like, the dean tells me to come to his office. She's taken herself and my dad off of the FAFSA paperwork. So me and my brother are about to be kicked out of college because we have no funding. And so I had to go hard for myself and advocate for myself and my brother, like, extremely. Like, I went to the dean of admissions, I went to the president of Texas Tech University, went to his office and begged him for help for me and my brother so that we could go to college, because there was nothing at home. There was no way for us to go see our dad. And I knew my dad wouldn't want us to give up our lives or give up our spot in college, because he came from an immigrant family. It was always his dream to see his kids go to college. So I knew, I was like, Dad wants me to go. Dad wants me to go to college. And every time I kept asking for support, which is why I started this podcast, every time I kept asking people for support, no one knew how to support me. No one knew how to hold space, how to listen. And I finally, like, snapped physically, mentally, emotionally, and had a really severe seizure and fell down a flight of stairs and essentially tore ligaments and my muscles away from my pelvis. And it got severely infected, and I was in the hospital for a couple days, and I couldn't walk for 3 months. And I was like, oh, damn. I can't do anything now. It's like,
Wow.
oh no. And I was in theater. I was a dancer. So it went from dancing for at least 2-3 hours a day to I can't walk. I can't move. And my siblings were the only ones that really helped me, that keep going, because none of my friends were there for me. They weren't real friends, let's be honest. None of them were there for me. And so I got back into, making jewelry and stuff like that. So that was in January when I fell down the flight of stairs, 2021. And I started making jewelry because there was nothing else I could do. I couldn't do anything. I could do all my classes online because my teachers were like, yeah, we understand. It's end of COVID. Most of them are online anyway. They're like, yeah, just show up. So I started making jewelry. And the first thing that I started making was Pray for Mark pieces because I didn't want people to forget my dad because my dad was still in the hospital and I didn't want people to forget him. And I started like selling them and mailing them out. You can barely see, but I started selling them, mailing them out to other.
I get the idea. I get the
Yeah.
idea.
Selling them, mailing them out. And more people then remembered that me and my brothers existed, that not just my dad.
Mhm.
And because of that, more people that loved my dad knew my dad because I can't stress this enough. He was so loved. Like he was amazing. Loved him. So they started being like, "Oh, wait, Mark has 3 children." um they're going to need help. But unfortunately, a lot of them started sending money to my mother instead of to us. We never saw any of that money. We never did. But there were some ladies at Texas Tech who then through my bracelets heard about my dad, then heard about me, and I got myself and my brother a full ride to Texas Tech
Oh, wow.
because
That's
of
amazing.
it. And eventually, November 6th, in October, actually, before November, my dad was dying. He was no longer making any progress and he started to decline really quickly. And I knew in my heart that he had given up, that he couldn't do it anymore. And everyone in my family was like, no, let's keep pushing him. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Because there's another side to, I'm so glad that you overcame your TBI, but there are some people that don't, that can't. And I was the one who advocated for my dad to be released, essentially, that he could have some peace instead of the constant drugs and the constant getting up and trying to make him move because he was just deteriorating before my eyes. So in October, they put him in a hospice and I just sat with him every single day till he died. And that was also very traumatic to watch your parent just wither away. But it was also very peaceful because I knew that he wouldn't suffer anymore. Because I know you don't think about it this way, but you are an exceptional case. And it's not just because you as a person, but it's because the community that you had.
I couldn't agree more. That's why the first letter in the step system is support, and that's why I go all into detail on that. And I'll give your listeners a way at the end that they can download the entire step system for free and learn all about support, trust, energy, and persistence at the end. So if you kind of, I did that all throughout knocking on doors, pre-foreclosure doors, the rest of high school. Then when I got out of high school, I got my real estate license and became a realtor. So I was really full time a realtor for 6 years.
Wow.
And then in 2000, helping both buyers and sellers. Then in 2016, I know a lot of your listeners are probably thinking, wow, what a great time to be a realtor. I got my real estate license March 8th of 2008, right before or right as the
The
market,
crash.
yeah,
Oh.
right as everything was coming down. However, I didn't know any better, so I learned to sell in that environment. And I really think door knocking helped me in that regard, that it's okay to get a no. It's not the end of the world. So you just gotta you have to keep going. And then in 2014, my dad approached me that he needed help with all these properties that he was getting under contract as an investor. So without signing personally on loans or making big down payments or getting big investor money to buy these houses, he was getting them non-conventionally on terms, is what we like to call it, like either through a rent to own, purchasing it through a rent to own, which is really nothing more than a delayed cash sale. Rent to own, owner financing is another way. If the seller didn't have any debt on the property, we could do principal only payments. And then the third way, just to keep it simple, there's tons of different variations of this, but I'm just trying to keep it simple. The third way is subject to buy a home subject to someone's existing mortgage and actually close on it, but keep the original loan on the property. So however he was getting them, he needed help with marketing all these houses for buyers on the rent to own market. So he asked me once, and I was like, no, I got my own thing going on here. And luckily he asked me a few times, and I finally came around to the idea that I could do this right alongside being a realtor, my realtor business. So over the course of 13 months, my income shifted, where it was when I first started with him, I was maybe only making 10% of my income with him, and most of it, 90% as a realtor. And then over the course of 13 months, my income shifted where I was making the majority with him, 90, even upwards of 95%, and only like a little bit, maybe 10%, as a realtor. So it didn't make sense for me to keep my license anymore. So in January of 2016, I let my license go. The marketing all the homes turned into, oh shoot, now I need help with all the buyers that are calling from the marketing. So that morphed into that, and then that morphed into, all right, I have to create a system that we have to put these rent-to-own buyers through, so they're able to get to the end of their rent-to-own agreement and qualify for their loan. And then it was through all trial and error and putting these systems, tools, and processes in place, we found that, all right, we have something here. So we started teaching this and helping associates across the country to implement the same systems, tools, and processes in their business that we had success with our business. And ever since my accident, I've always had this voice in the back of my head. So going back to the voice in the back of your head, I've always had this voice in the back of my head that's saying, no matter what I was doing, Grace, yeah, that's great, but what you really need to be doing is telling your story from stage and helping others get through their trauma and thrive with the rest of their life. So that voice has always been in the back of my head. We hold yearly events, either one or two events per year that I've always spoke at throughout the years. And we first started doing events back in 2016. So I've told my story a few times at those, and it usually doesn't, it's usually nowhere longer than 15, 20, 25 minutes max. Someone who saw me speak, her name is Sharon Spano, in September 2019 at our last event that we had before COVID, approached me and said, hey, you did a great job, did an amazing job. I'm not trying to steal you from your dad. However, if you're ever looking to fine tune your message and kind of bring it to another level so you're able to impact and affect the most amount of people possible, I can introduce you to a few people, speaker bureaus and coaches, and help you get started. So I was actually, and I haven't talked about this yet, I was actually still going through a voice issue. So I developed a voice issue back in 2012, and I looked everywhere, and I just couldn't figure out what was wrong. Went to all these doctors and specialists, and everyone said I was fine. Oh, you're fine. All your levels are fine. Your like pulse, everything, all that was fine, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. I knew something wasn't right though. So finally, I wound up in a voice specialist office in August of 2013, about a year after starting to look for answers. And there's only 35 of these specialists in the whole country. The guy walked in the room, heard me speak, and right away nonchalantly goes, "Oh, that? Yeah, we deal with that all the time. We'll get you fixed in no time. We'll schedule a Botox injection
Botox?
at the front desk, and we'll get it fixed right away." So I started receiving, yeah, exactly. I started receiving Botox injections into my vocal folds. I couldn't even speak. It was hard to get the words out. So
Yeah.
he did the Botox injections to paralyze the muscles and relax them. And then as they were coming back after 2 or 3 weeks, I would work with their highly trained voice therapists to, like, above even a regular speech pathologist or a speech therapist, to retrain my muscles, how to speak, and be able to do it again. So I think I'm more proud of this than I am my accent. I had previously said that when I look back at it, I'm like, oh, I just did what anyone else would do. Um, Part of the reason of that is I think I'm more proud of this overcoming this voice issue, because I had to get Botox injections and work with a speech therapist and do exercises daily for 8 years, maybe even longer than that. So I may have recency bias, but it definitely took a lot more persistence to overcome that. And there were some dark moments. I don't want to say dark. That's maybe being a little too strong. There were moments during that where I would get down on myself, and I gave myself permission to have a pity party for 5 minutes. That, oh, I've been working at this so long, and I'm doing my exercises, and it doesn't seem like it's I'm getting there, and and I only let myself do it for 5 minutes, and then I just went back to doing the exercises daily, getting natural treatments like Tuina massage, cranial sacral massage, acupuncture, all those in between the Botox injections, and then that allowed me to stretch the Botox injections out longer. And then February 13th of 2020, I got my last Botox injection. So I don't need it anymore. It's worked its way out of my system. And like I said earlier, I think I'm more proud of that than I am my accident. And then when I was getting to the end of that, I was like, all right, I have something here. I really have something here. I did it with my accident. I overcame that, and I did it again with my voice issue. I really have to get this message out there to the world, and spread it, and help thousands, tens of thousands of individuals, countless individuals, really. You can't even count it. How many people my message and my story is affecting right now. So um, that's it. With that, I'll take a step down off the stage here in my soapbox and see if you have any questions for me.
No, I love hearing, like, oh, I actually prefer when my guests do all the talking, because I'm learning. It fills my heart with so much joy to hear your story and to also hear your struggle, because yeah, I think you also got to take it to, like, the consciousness of, a 14-year-old, like, going against the world. I can do it. And then versus an adult who's been, you know, in a sense, beat down by society, because you do go through that. And your voice is such a crucial part of expression. I mean, I'm a voice teacher. I teach people how to sing.
Mm.
It's such
You don't want me singing, but
That's not true. I'll teach anybody, because it is your muscles. It's not just your larynx, your
Mm.
trachea, your epiglottis, your vocal folds, or your diaphragm. It's all of it together working in harmony with breath, with informed conscious breath. And from my experience. Singing really is healing, and being able to communicate these things in a way that is pleasing to the ear and also pleasing to the mind. And
Absolutely.
my cat is trying to get into my closet. I don't know why. Loki Wong. Loki. He's like, I want the door to open. He's such a little
So
weirdo.
I learned going through that, I learned a lot about of all the muscles and everything. So yeah, I learned all about that when I was going through it.
I know. And it's so fun to learn these things too, because it's a part of our body, and yet we're so unaware of how much your body is doing for you constantly.
Hmm.
And for
Because
me,
no one thinks of it. You just, oh,
no,
it's something you do. You open your mouth and talk. But when that gets stripped away, when that gets taken away, yeah, you learn real quick about it.
yeah, you really do. You
Yep.
really do. And it gives you so much more appreciation for the things that we often take for granted.
Yep. That's one of them.
We take a lot for granted.
Mhm.
And when I fell down the flight of stairs, I took for granted being able to freaking dance and move. And I still, have so much scar tissue. And on my healing journey, I told my fiance Joey, I was like, I want to start dancing again. And he's like, okay, well, you can't just go and start dancing. You got to work your way up to it. So every day I've been doing stretches and trying to move a lot more, be more mobile. And it's a conscious effort of trying not to get frustrated with myself. Like, I used to be able to do this and not get frustrated and be like, okay, yes, you did used to be able to do that, but you didn't just go being able to do that. You had to work your way to be able to do that. Now we just got to work back to be able to do it again. And if we look at our mental health in that framework of, yeah, maybe you used to be able to deal with stressors in a more effective way. And now that you've gone through a trauma, it's not as, easy anymore. It's not as second nature. And we have to make active choices, informed choices to be able to understand ourselves and understand how the world interacts with us. It's complicated, but it eventually becomes very worth it. And the more you do it, the more second nature it does become. Like riding a bike. I would ride a bike every single day as a kid, like all the time. And when I went to college, I had a bicycle because you got to have a bike in college. And my fiance was like, I want to start riding bikes again. So I bought us new bikes. And I'm like, oh my God, this used to be so easy. And now I'm huffing and puffing and I'm struggling up this hill. Oh no. But the more we do it, the more our body becomes in tune with it and the easier it becomes. It's not just easy starting off, but it will the more we continue on and the more determined we are and the more perseverance we take. And I want to ask you this question. Do you consider what you've gone through, especially with your vocal folds, do you consider what you've gone through as trauma?
Yeah, that's why I'm sharing this message. Yeah,
What do you
absolutely.
think of the
Something
saying,
it was something that I had to work through. Yeah, absolutely.
mhm. What do you think of the saying, I transmute my pain into purpose?
I love it, and that's actually why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing. That leads me perfectly into the last thing that I wanted to talk about, and that's um I believe that. So there has always, as I said, there's always been that voice in the back of my head that's saying, yeah, okay, great, whatever success I was having. but what you really need to be doing is helping others get through their trauma and thrive with the rest of their lives. And ever since I made that, I was introduced to Sharon's mentor, who's become my mentor, Trisha. There has been no voice in the back of my head. So that's evidence that I'm doing exactly what I was put on this earth to do, following my purpose. And that ties together with your question. So what I covered would be was only a 10,000-foot view of the STEP system. However, if your listeners want to learn all about support, trust, energy, and persistence, they can download the whole STEP system for free by going to nickprefontaine.com/step. And that's going to help them take their first step today. I know a lot of people out there are frozen in fear and that they're stuck and they don't know what to do. That's a great first step. And once you take your first step, your next step is always going to be available to you.
Well put, dude. I appreciate that. And we're also going to be putting that link in the description on both YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So if you want to check out his free program for STEP, please click the links and support him for being on this podcast, because honestly, Nick, this has been an amazing discussion. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the openness and the willingness to share, and also, be there and support other people. How can I support you going forward?
How can you support me? I would say just once this comes out, I would just share with your listeners. I'm gonna absolutely, if you could send it to me on email, I'm gonna absolutely schedule it out on my social media calendar to make sure it gets out there, and we can help and change lives together and help the world together.
That would be awesome. I really appreciate it, Nick. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
If you're watching us on YouTube, here are our memes of the week, carefully curated by the amazing people over on our Discord server. Now let's get into those memes. At the end of every episode, we spin our wheel of emotions to learn a new feeling and how it correlates to trauma. So let's spin our wheel, shall we? Ooh. Confused. It landed on confused and startled, so I'm going to go with confused. Especially when it comes to traumatic brain injuries, we can be very confused about our surroundings. Things that once made sense to us suddenly don't anymore. And it also really does impact, your personal community when you suffer from a traumatic brain injury. I know, speaking from experience with my dad, it was a very, very confusing time. Because of his traumatic brain injury, he lost all physical capabilities, but also mental capabilities and emotional capabilities. Even though he was still physically alive, and he was alive for about a year after, he lost all ability to be a dad. He lost all of the ability to be there for me, support his other children, my brothers. It was a very confusing time to see the person that provided for you and took care of you and made sure that you were alive laid so low that now it kind of was put on us, his family, to make sure that he stayed alive for as long as he did. And when it was no longer feasible, when his body was failing him, it was also very confusing to toe the line between, I miss my dad, I love my dad, I want my dad to still be here, but he's suffering. And I don't want him to suffer anymore. I want him to be at peace. It was very confusing. And still looking back on it now, it's also really confusing. Trauma doesn't always make sense. And part of the human condition is trying to make sense of everything around us. But sometimes we just have to accept that things in life don't make sense and won't make sense, and have to make peace with that. And I know that's so hard. It's so hard, believe me. But it's also really freeing to just let go. I just want to say to all of you guys out there, thank you so much for being a part of the journey. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to support our podcast, we have a Patreon. Different tiers can get you a bracelet. That's a handmade bracelet made by me, Grace. Or you can get a sticker like the one on the back of my computer. The links are in our description. Any support helps us out a lot. So if you feel compelled to, please like, subscribe, share the show with your friends, and rate the show if you're listening to us over on those listening platforms. Thank you so much for being here. Just a reminder before we end this episode, you are capable of a fulfilling life in spite of your circumstances and your trauma. May you rise again from the ashes and be filled with peace, hope, love, joy, and understanding. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Goodbye.